So, welcome back to Everything Marketplaces, where we talk with founders and leaders from some of today's top marketplaces. So, this is episode 140, which is a really incredible group chat that we just had with Sarah Tavel, who's a partner at Benchmark. So, Benchmark, of course, is a leading venture fund that's backed notable marketplaces like Uber, REKKI, Hipcamp, Cambly, and many more. So, Sarah's published lots of incredible posts and content on marketplaces and is a leading mind in the world of marketplace startups. So this is a really great chat with Sarah, where we got to learn more about what initially led her to marketplaces, what make them such great businesses to invest in, got to learn more about Benchmark as a fund, what they look for in marketplaces that they invest in, trends and opportunities, and also had a really great group Q&A. So really enjoyed this conversation, and you're going to find it a great watch to the end. So Sarah, welcome to the group chat. This has been such a long time in the works, so it's really great to have you join us here today. And I'd like to start off by saying, huge thanks for taking the time to do so in advance. So before we dive into all of your awesome experience and more about investing at Benchmark, I thought it might be great if you can start off by sharing a little bit more on your background, though, for those that might not know you.
I kind of joined venture a year out of college and was doing a lot of different types of companies and ended up getting super lucky and investing in Pinterest, the Series A, and joined there when it was just, kind of maybe a little over a dozen people, maybe 20. And then was there for 3.5 years and came back to the venture side and started to reflect a lot on my experience at Pinterest and like what I was responsible for. I became the product lead for our discovery surfaces. So the search, the recommendations, the home feed. And that's all about like, how do you take the users that you have on Pinterest and help them find things that are, that they love, that they want to add to their boards. And I hope you all are avid Pinterest users, so you understand what I'm talking about. And so my job was like increasing engagement, increasing repins on Pinterest. And then when I left to go to the venture side, it ended up thinking a lot about that experience and like, what was it, when I was, I went to Greylock as one of the GPs there. What was it that, I did? And it forced me to start really synthesizing what we think of now as flywheels, virtuous loops. And that was kind of first focused on, social networks, products where it's a market, I didn't really think about it at the time, but it's a marketplace. It's just that it's time, like your users are giving you time and then, and kind of engagement in your product. And then you're using that to then supply them with content that they want to have. And then when I moved to Benchmark, I had been thinking a lot when I was at Greylock about networks, and like started to, invest and kind of looking at a lot like transactional businesses. And so then when I came to Benchmark, I, just got really excited about, marketplaces. Like there's so many different types of transactional businesses. But, I was on the board of this company called Sonder, with an unbelievable CEO there. But man, I would tell them there was no like true network effect there. And I would tell them, I'm like, Francis, like the Airbnb guys can like not come to work for 6 months and they'll come back to the office and they'll have grown, 50% to, whatever it is. You don't come to the office for 6 months and you're screwed. And then, I kind of realized like actually the investing in the type of business and running the type of business where you can, where once you get the structure set up and the system set up and the momentum going, it takes on a life of its own where your job gets easier over time, not harder. That seems like the ingredients for something that really can go the distance. And so I ended up kind of getting very curious, focused on marketplaces. Any businesses with network effects, marketplaces being the main one. And so now I'm on the board of, I don't know how many, ranging from consumer, like Hipcamp and Cambly to B2B, like Medely, which is a marketplace for nurses, like per diem nurses, or REKKI, which is a marketplace for restaurants and their suppliers. So kind of interesting, B2B, B2C and B2B. And yeah, continue, I think there's so much you learn from studying marketplaces. And so it makes me a better investor looking at SaaS companies, a better partner to my companies there. So anyway, that's maybe not the intro you expect, but that's, I thought more relevant.
Oh no, that's a really great background. So thanks for sharing more with us. So definitely so much we can get into. I guess from the kind of an investor point of view, though, what makes marketplaces great businesses? Do you think?
I mean, so we at Benchmark, and I think this is a lot of Bill's influence. Like we're always thinking of like, what does this company look like at scale as a public company? Like how do you, if you think about it that way and you work backwards, like you really want to build a business that, as Peter Thiel says, escapes competition, because once you escape competition, once you as I think of it, like really dominate, like you're number one by a long shot, then, all the costs that typically go into acquisition are so much lower. Like, I don't know if you guys remember when DoorDash versus Grubhub versus Uber Eats were competing. It felt like if they were 2 minutes late with their order, you would get like a $20 gift certificate, like they were always, because they were fighting for each point of market share. They were having no contribution profit. But once you get to a point where you dominate, you just have more leverage with the customer. You have more leverage with the supply side, and you more leverage, but also you become more like a black hole where it just is obvious that you're going to go work with the dominant platform. And so you end up having a business, being able to build a business that's really profitable. And ultimately, we forgot about this in 2021, 2022, but like cash is, it's not the whole point of building a business, but ultimately it's how your business gets valued, cash flow. And so how do you build a cash flowing business? You escape competition. And how do you do that? The best way is to have a network effect, and network effect businesses that have dollars involved are marketplaces, and those tend to be pretty swell. So that's creates a lot of focus.
Yeah, and I believe that was level 3, right? And you're really great at
yes.
post series
Yes.
As far as the hierarchy of marketplaces. So
yes.
It's been referenced many times in the community, to say the least.
Oh, great.
So I guess kind of transitioning into Benchmark, what led you to joining the team there, actually?
I was at Greylock at the time, and it wasn't totally the right fit for me. I felt a little bit like an incredible group of people, but just there was something I was feeling. And then the Benchmark team reached out to me, and I got to know them, and I got to first know the individuals, but then also really understand the structure of the equal partnership and how that ends up manifesting in the relationships that you have with founders, like both on when you're actually investing and then when you're supporting the companies after. And it was, for me, one of those things that once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Like, I think that what happens at larger firms, and this is honestly it's hard not for this to happen, is that you end up having politics or dysfunction because of different relationships partners have with each other. And that affects the founder. It affects them when they come in to present their company. It affects them when they have a tricky situation or when they're looking to hire a CFO or whatever that is. But when you have an equal partnership, what it means is, if I invest in a company or one of my partners invest in a company, we actually are economically incentivized the same, regardless of who made the investment. And so, it's so far from how other firms are organized that it creates a team way of thinking where company comes in to present to the group, we're all thinking about, is this a benchmark investment? When a company is having a big situation like, M&A situation, or really looking for a CFO, we're all thinking collectively, how do we help that company in that moment? And I'm someone who played team sports. I love that. And I'm also someone who's a complete idiot when it comes to politics. And so not having to deal with that makes my life easier.
I can certainly relate on the point as far as being a team sport, and it definitely sounds like you have an awesome team there. So
Yes.
on that note too, I guess can you give us maybe like a brief overview though, just for a little bit of context as far as Benchmark as a venture fund?
Sure. So Benchmark is 6 people, 6 general partners. Uh, we have an incredibly informative website. And I'm just kidding on the website. There's nobody laughing. So nobody, I didn't see any smirks. So no one has gone to our website. And we have no platform team, no marketing team, hence our website. We're really, the idea is 6 general partners whom we each make 1 or 2 investments a year and always with a board seat. Ideally, I would say in 80% of our investments, we're the first board member. And then I always say 20% of the time we messed up and missed that round and we do the next round. But that's it. There's no seed program. There's no benchmark light. There's no benchmark growth. We're just early stage. And then the whole firm is created from that perspective, working backwards. And so then when we invest, we're really invested from our time perspective. And so there's no like, oh, if it doesn't work out, I'll just pay less attention to that company. There's no platform team to whom we, push the work of being a board member. We think to be the best board member we can be at the early stages, we have to be fully enmeshed with the founders and doing some of that work ourselves, like team building, recruiting, all that stuff. And so that's our model.
And that's very helpful. So thanks for walking us through that. So I guess, maybe using an example of a portfolio company, say, for instance, Hipcamp or Cambly, could you maybe share a little bit more about, just kind of walk us through, how you met the founders, maybe how you evaluated it as a marketplace, and, maybe some like the reasons why you think it can ultimately be like a large marketplace. So that way you give us an idea of kind of what you look for and how you evaluate marketplaces.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I could talk about both. They're both such interesting marketplaces, but I'll talk about Cambly just because it's kind of an interesting article. It's interesting insofar as some of the conversations we could have later, which is like, all marketplaces. So Cambly is a marketplace for people to connect to a native English speaker. And I remember actually a partner, Jeremy Levine, who I worked with for 6 years at Bessemer, led the Series A. And I remember hearing about Cambly and being like, why did he invent? Like, this kind of seems small from the outside. By the way, I love companies that seem small from the outside. Hipcamp's opportunity also seems small from the outside. But even though I like companies that seem small from the outside, I still have the bias of like, that seems small. What's up with this? And then, I didn't really think much about it. And then Jeremy kind of reached out to us actually and said, hey, you should really talk to this company. And so I downloaded the app and I had like a real aha moment, which was that I had looked at some of the other marketplaces for language learning, and all of them are a tutor for, who says, hey, I'm an English speaker if you want to learn English. I'm a Spanish speaker if you want to learn Spanish. And so you're basically building a marketplace for the lowest common denominator, which could be like me as an English speaker trying to learn Spanish because I'm going to Spain or Argentina or whatever, or me as like literally a Ukrainian learning French, or someone in Brazil wanting to learn English. Like when you're playing for all those, different scenarios, you end up creating like a very generic marketplace, right? Which is tutors posting, with different prices, and you can choose how much you're willing to pay, and then you choose a tutor. It makes a lot of sense, but there's not a lot of differentiation there. What was so cool, I realized with Cambly, was that these guys had decided to focus just on learning English. And I didn't realize it until I downloaded the app. But what happens is like you go to Cambly, and right there, when you download it and you sign up, is before you've paid anything, you get 5 minutes of free time on demand with an English tutor. So like right there, I go boom, and I was talking and pretending I didn't speak English with a native English speaker, and there was this aha moment for me, which is that when you're really, really, really focused on, in this case, just the needs of people who want to learn English, you create a very different product experience. You create this experience that's on demand, English tutors. And you also and you can do that because you create liquidity 24 hours a day, right? So regardless of where you are in the world, you have enough liquidity to handle the on-demand requests. Someone who is willing to wants to learn English is doing so to unlock economic, opportunity for themselves. And they need to be able to speak. It's conversational. And so in the very beginning of Cambly, there was no structure to the connection. It was just speaking, getting comfortable speaking. And then, now they have, structure that they can add, like, oh, it sounds like you're getting your prepositions wrong. Here's, a quick lesson we could do on that. But I thought it was so cool how different that was. And then, I spoke to the founders and just were super impressed by them, blown away by the business. It was kind of cash flow positive, from the really very, very beginning. And so it was an easy yes for us.
That's a really great point, though, as far as, you mentioned the, starting with such a very narrow focus in the very beginning, and, a lot of founders here in the community doing so as well. So. So one of the other kind of topics that I wanted to chat about is, typically kind of like when you're investing, I would say like at the kind of Series A stage, what some of the maybe like some of the kind of metrics that you look for are. And I actually kind of want to use that as a chance to kind of bring up one of your previous posts as far as a happy GMV. A lot of times it's, founders in the community, we're just thinking about, GMV and, I know you've mentioned that it can be somewhat of a vanity metric. So I would love to, just kind of, I guess, walk through that post a little bit more, and then maybe discuss some of the other kind of metrics that you look for as well.
Yeah, I actually am working on a new blog post to talk about this a little bit more, which is like, I feel like there's like these two poles, which is like good growth versus bad growth. Maybe it's not good growth versus bad growth, but there's something like that where there's a real important tension that every company should feel, which is like how, you're trying to grow quickly, but you don't want to go too much towards the bad growth side of the spectrum in order to grow quickly. And what I mean by that is like, and you guys, now I'm going to be preaching to the choir, I'm sure, or repeating things that you all already know, but like easiest way, let's take Postmates. Easiest way to grow delivery product was to launch in big cities across a lot of categories and just like spend, grow. And that to me is on the bad growth spectrum, which is like you are short-term chasing something that's like this GMV number, which makes you feel good as it goes up. And that's why the risk of GMV is that's a vanity metric. But without really figuring out, what's the goal, which is dominance, and working backwards from there. Right. And so if you're not starting with dominance, working backwards from there, you're the easiest path to growing GMV is going to be working against dominance. It's going to be spreading yourself too thin, mile wide, inch deep. So when I look at companies, I care a lot about, are they focused on, the dominance, work backwards from there. And all the time I see founders and I feel like they're just hitting 100, like $1 million of GMV, annualized GMV, and they're in like, they have a, let's call it we're in 4 different cities. Oh, well, we thought investors would want to see that the product works in these other cities. Like, to me, it's a little bit like I have this visual in my mind of like, you want to get up to the mountain and you're going like, what I need to do to show a Series A investor, what I need to do to show a Series B investor, what I need to do to C, and like kind of that thinking, as opposed to like get here and work backwards from there. And you guys know the answer, like, so then you're looking at like in the focus, like how to go to dominance, and then obviously, you're seeing the ramp, you're seeing how that acquisition happens, and you're looking at cohorts to know like how sticky this is.
Really great point. So we try to emphasize liquidity versus GMV in the community a lot too. So you mentioned earlier, as far as some of the investments that you make at a benchmark and probably doing less and, working more closely with them, maybe compared to some of the other funds. So do you think that kind of shapes like how you evaluate marketplaces?
Yeah. The trickiest thing is like this is, I'm a huge believer that every strength has a corresponding weakness and vice versa, right? So the strength of our model is that we really care when we invest in a company, and we're there, we're shoulder to shoulder, we're doing that work together. We're not sending a founder to all these internal consultants. That's not what we do. We're there, we're doing that work together. The corresponding weakness of that is that it sets an unreasonably high bar for getting to yes. It's really, really hard. And so there's a little bit almost of like falling in love that happens, which is like, you have to really believe, that this is a founder with whom I'm going to be super excited to work and, have that unconditional support. Because like, we're doing, I'm getting phone calls or text messages late at night or on the weekend. And like, and the relationship we have is that I want a founder to like feel like we're in the, I'm there. And like, if something happens at 10 p.m. on a Thursday, that they're going to call me, and do that. And so you just, it's not transactional. It's like really a relationship that we build, and you build it through the process of getting to know the business.
Yeah. With the focus on the founder and, having that awesome relationship, are there maybe any traits that you see with some of the best kind of founders that you also look for as well?
Absolutely. The biggest thing, and it's not even close, is being a learning animal. Like it's not even close, you guys. Like you have to have and like I feel like learning animal is the prerequisite, or is often a positive externality of ambition, but like, obsession. But like, if you're a learning animal, like we just had dinner last night with a founder, I won't say who it is, and oh my God, that guy was a learning animal. Like from a young age, he was just, reading everything he could, cold DMing people on Twitter or like whatever it is to like learn from them, constantly soaking up as much information as he can from the people around him to build the best company that he can build and be the best CEO he can be. And like, the job of a CEO is so, I'm a New Yorker, it's so fucking hard. Like, the job just, it's never done. It's relentless. And, and if you're not willing to be vulnerable, and like to be a learning animal, you have to be willing to be vulnerable, right? Because if you're not willing to be vulnerable, you won't admit to yourself you don't know something, and then you won't try to learn it. But like, if you are able to be vulnerable, you put yourself in the mindset of being able to learn from other people, surrounding you with the best people you possibly can do. And that is the difference I've seen from the founders who do go the distance
Mm-hmm.
versus the ones that get stuck. And when they get stuck, their companies get stuck too.
Yeah, you got a lot of head nods for that one. So
Okay, good.
I'm sure you see so many different marketplaces and speak with a lot of different founders. So are there any kind of misconceptions that you're seeing when it comes to maybe early stage marketplaces right now?
Misconceptions in early stage marketplaces. Part of the question is, man, is all the white space gone? And the I see some people shaking their heads like, I don't think so, but it is going to take different tools. And, in consumer social, what tends to happen, or not just consumer social, consumer, there tends to be a technology catalyst that creates a new wave of companies. The last obvious thing was this guy, but it was, adding the camera, adding the, with GPS, like it was these types of things that created a new, I always think of it as like a palette. Like you have all these components and then the founder sees that palette, it's able to draw something with that. That was like the last, internet getting better, LTE, all those things made a big difference. Now, then there was the crypto wave. And, honestly, I'm still freaking disappointed by that. Like, I still think NFTs are really freaking cool. Just the idea of like digital scarcity is so provocative to me. We have two investments in that space. I sold one of them to OpenAI. The other one, So Rare, is just an incredible team and product in kind of fantasy soccer. But as you guys all know, that space just got completely consumed by speculation. And I think aided and abetted by some crypto funds. And now we have large language models. And so the question is, does large language model, like, I think a question is like, this is clearly a technology catalyst. I see it completely transforming the type of work people, the type of offerings people can sell. Does it make it possible for some types of marketplaces that previously were not touchable because they were, just for whatever reason, it was long tail, like you couldn't automate as much outreach as you needed, like there was, too much unstructured data, whatever it is. Is there something that changes fundamentally with large language models? Maybe. So anyway, the Airbnb wasn't a technology catalyst, it was a founder catalyst. And so it's not always the case that there is a technology catalyst, but this is certainly a rich time to be dreaming.
Yeah, certainly. So we're going to get into questions here. So I'm getting a lot of messages of the founders just asking if we can get to the, group Q&A since they have some questions. But that was actually a great kind of segue into a topic I actually did want to, briefly touch on, which is as far as, when it comes to AI, since that's the, topic everyone's been talking about. And, maybe some of the specific opportunities that you're seeing for marketplaces or even, examples of marketplaces.
Been using AI well? What are some that you've seen?
I would say actually one interesting is we had an Anthemos from Zumper that was on previously, and he was talking about kind of meeting users where they are. So they were using a Chat GPT, a plugin for renters, and an example for that was like searching in San Diego, and maybe like this specifically X amount of walkable distance from like a Whole Foods and sun exposure, and it's really interesting to learn more about that.
Yeah. I mean, look, like I think it's a great example of an existing marketplace being, having more powers with large language models. Like, Hipcamp is doing something I think is really cool, which is like they have so many reviews and they're summarizing those with LLMs and that creates better user experience. But I'm very curious about the de novo marketplaces that are going to be created leveraging LLMs, that's, and what the only things I've seen so far, but maybe I'm missing it, have been like travel related. And travel makes sense. It's, it's a space where you do have a normal kind of back end, everything else is search focused, TripAdvisor, etc. And then you have kind of travel agents, humans, that you then have more of a kind of a consultative experience with. Can you leverage large language models to provide that consultative experience that differentiates you from the transactional search-driven UIs? Yeah, probably. But that's kind of the first category I've seen. And the mental model makes sense.
Yeah, it'll certainly be interesting to see it kind of play out. So.
Yeah, I'm super curious. And I think part of the challenge that a lot of people are experiencing is that it's still so early, you guys. It's so early. And I have a friend who is creating, or a founder who is, but I think she's awesome, so I call her a friend, who's building a consumer app leveraging large language models. It's and she was telling me, she's like, oh my God, there's so much tooling we have to build ourselves first before we can even get to building the consumer product, because there's just this infrastructure, the developer tools, all the tooling that you would want hasn't been built. And so, what accelerates productivity of developers to build the end user experiences is having all the tools so that they can grab this library, grab this tool set or API, whatever it is. And obviously, large language models is the biggest API, productivity improvement, but there's still actually so much more, because these models are not they're not deterministic. There's still challenges with hallucinations. There's a big change from a demo to production that's been very hard for companies to navigate so far. And so we're just still really early.
Dimitri, did you want to come on?
Good morning. I have a question about your thoughts on the potential for aggregating demand or supply, either within a platform or across platforms. So I'm going to use ride sharing to kind of motivate this. For example, Uber Pool is an example of within platform demand aggregation. You could also maybe aggregate demand across platforms. So for instance, as a consumer, I might want to see if Uber or Lyft is cheaper, and then just automatically get matched with a driver from that platform. Do you see any potential in this type, on these kind of two models, either in the demand or supply side?
I think it's so specific. The challenge with the aggregation idea that you described, there's been a lot of companies, some are actually built their business on, Craigslist, I think, at the beginning. Of course, before they got, denied access by Craigslist. And so there's been a lot of companies over time. There have been, I don't know how many companies I've seen that have said, for the driver, if we're going to give you the best place to make money with DoorDash, Uber Eats, whatever, name your delivery. The challenge is that more often than not, the person being aggregated doesn't want to be aggregated. And so, because they want to own the end user. And so you end up it works in the beginning until someone notices you, and then it stops working. It's all about owning the harder part of the market to acquire. And so yeah, I would say the Uber Pool thing, by the way, was it's aggregating the demand side, but it's also expanding the value proposition.
Hey, Sarah, actually, I had a question for you myself, and it was that actually a few founders asked, and then was on the Google Doc. But of course, Bill Gurley is a legend in the world of marketplaces. So, working with him, on the team there, has there maybe been any kind of specific learnings or lessons from him as far as when it comes to marketplaces?
Man, how do I even answer that? Because there's just so many things. Certainly, the whole thing of focusing on a market that, a small market that you can run the table on has influence. Like, I remember when I I looked at Hipcamp when I was at Greylock with a seed. And the feedback I got was just like, "Oh, this is small market. Like these guys, like they're not going to build anything valuable." And then I brought Hipcamp into benchmark for the A. Alyssa had kind of reached out to me where we were rekindling our relationship, and Bill was like, "I don't care how small the market is. Like she's making money out of nowhere." Like, and he has a blog post making money out of thin air or something like that, which is just like this idea that, people have land, they don't have it online. You bring that land online and people were making tens of thousands of dollars, a month with that. Like, oh my God, all of a sudden you're making money out of, thin air, basically. Like you can then imagine where you go from there to help people generate even more revenue. And so that idea really came from him. The second thing I'll say is like the first draft of my hierarchy of marketplaces, you guys, like it wasn't good. I was like, a lot of these things, like I thought I understood marketplaces. I like did the whole thing and I sent it to him. And he and then we like sat down and he went through it. And it was like this, like, oh, wow, I thought I understood it. I really don't. Or I did on a surface. I didn't deeply understand marketplaces. And I ended up for like, I don't know how many more months then I went on a learning journey myself to like really, really, really understand and learn and synthesize. Like that piece took me more than 100 hours easily. I would say a couple hundred hours to like think through it, synthesize it. And a lot of it was like this moment I had with Bill. Have you guys ever heard of this 2x2 that's confidence versus competence? Where like someone starting something new starts high confidence, low competence. And then you go from high confidence to low confidence, and so you're low confidence, low competence. And then you go to high competence, but still low confidence. And then you go up to high. Bill helped me with that thing.
That's awesome. That's a great story. So the post definitely turned out super helpful. So as I mentioned earlier, they've been referenced so many times here in the community. Hey, JJ, do you want to jump on here really quick?
Hey, Sarah. I actually had the great opportunity to actually jump on a call with you when you spoke at REKKI. And one of the questions I had asked when I was at REKKI was, why were we at that point in time not pushing hard enough for monetization, especially when we had competition like Choco raising hundreds of millions of dollars and kind of breathing down our neck in like the US market? Do you think that idea of waiting to build the perfect product before monetizing has changed in this market now?
Yeah, and by the way, like I'm very cautious to make that same, like it's so stinking hard to add a monetization model after you've been having something free, like it's just not intrinsic. And so I think we made the investment in REKKI in 2018. JJ, you would know better than me.
Yeah, I was there from 2020 to 2022, so it was right after.
Yeah. But there's no question that now, good luck trying to raise when you're going to say you're going to add a monetization model later for a marketplace. And that's actually one of my pet peeves. I really, really struggle when I meet a company and they're like, oh, we're getting the, like, we want to get the flywheel spinning and then we're going to add the monetization model later. Like, oh, I really struggle with that because it's almost like it feels like you're trying to fool a VC, but you're fooling yourself. And like, because you don't know what's going to happen once you add that. It's So you do all this work, you get this flywheel spinning, you're like, you feel so good, and then you try to add monetization later, and it's going to end up completely changing things. And so I'm skeptical of, I totally got it for REKKI. It's a bank shot, for any people who play pool, and it's tricky. But my caution to you guys is like, yeah, the trickiness of, don't get caught up in the fundraising, really figure out where you want to go.
I actually had a question. Someone messaged me, and this is added to the doc again as well. As far as you had you mentioned that the tipping point in one of your posts previously. Is there maybe an example how maybe an early stage marketplace could think about like what that tipping point looks like for them?
Yeah, I mean, REKKI is a great example. It's like when you feel a marketplace tip, it's like the most incredible thing. Where like REKKI in the beginning, like was working, again, this is a marketplace, restaurants for their suppliers. And like in the beginning, they had to go, they're going after every buyer, with, on this like pounding the pavement type situation. The buyers, which is the chef or the people in the kitchen, then start placing orders on REKKI to their suppliers, and eventually the suppliers then start getting all these notifications from REKKI, and they're like, what's this REKKI thing? And then the suppliers kind of start to understand what REKKI is, and then the tipping point happens actually on a per supplier level first, which is then the suppliers start to be like, oh, well, this will make my life easier. Here, REKKI, have all my restaurants. And so you get this like tipping thing that happens. And then then they have more and more restaurants on it because the suppliers start tipping, that it becomes like this thing where all the suppliers are on REKKI. And so, it's the coolest experience, when it happens, because you just get this feeling of like all of a sudden the job gets a little bit easier for the founder. I mean, there's still plenty of hard stuff, as JJ knows, but it gets easier on those regards.
And then last but not least, kind of time for a quick plug. Where can everyone keep up with you at?
Well, obviously Twitter or my brand new newsletter, although it's more focused on LLMs, right? Well, I'm going to be writing a good growth versus bad growth post there. So you can find me in another place.
Awesome. I'll share a link, and you'll definitely have a lot of marketplace founders coming your way if they already aren't following you there. So
awesome. SarahTavel.com.
Well, thanks again, and thanks everyone for joining on the group chat today.